Hello third graders, soon to be fourth graders. Welcome to the third grade Woburn History Tour. My name is Mrs. Lucero and I'm a member of the Woburn Historical Society, and I want to share with you why you should love Woburn history too. Because I love Woburn history and I want you to love Woburn history. We have so much to be proud of. Do you know what the word history means? It is the remembrance of real life stories about people, events, and places. And Woburn has many places in this town to be very proud of. And today I'd like to share some of those with you so that you can tell your family and your friends how great Woburn is. Do you know what a superhero is? I know that there's like Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and somebody else that I'm forgetting. But Woburn has many superheroes, and I'm going to introduce you to a few superheroes that are real people and did great things for Woburn and the history of the United States. So let's get started. The Society has given your teachers a copy of the third grade trolley tour book. This is what you would have gotten on the trolley, but we're going to do it a little differently this year, as you can see, and we're going to do it remotely, but we'll follow the book as best we can and teach you about and show you the wonderful places that Woburn has. The founding of Woburn. Do you know about the Pilgrims? I think you're learning about that in school. The Pilgrims came here from England in 1620 and they landed at Plymouth Rock. Well, a few years after that, there was another group of people who came from England with Governor Winthrop, and they lived in Charlestown. And in 1638, if we open to this book, we're going to see the founding of Woburn would soon happen after that, because Captain Edward Johnson, who was a very important man in Charlestown in the 1630s, he was asked to come out and find a new town and a new church because they were Puritans. They came here for religious freedom. So they were looking for another town that they could expand and grow the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So Captain Edward Johnson came out to Woburn, this Woburn area near the pond, with 6 brave men. These 6 men who came out with Captain Johnson were John Mosel, Thomas Graves, Edward Converse, and the 3 Richardson brothers, Ezekiel, Samuel, and Thomas. And they came into the wilderness. And this is how we talk about Woburn. This was a wilderness. All that you see where I am here at the pond is not what these men came. There were no roads, there were no stores. There was Native American Indians. Some were friendly and some were not. But when they arrived and came to this area, they came in a blizzard and it was snowing and they had no shelter. The first night they came to this area near the pond, they slept under a tree. Can you imagine what that was like for them? No food to go. There was no 7-Eleven and there was no Stop and Shop for them to get something to eat. But what they did come upon were the friendly Native Americans, and they were called the Aborigines. And that word means, by the English settlers, tribes of the north. And the tribe that was here near this area of the pond were the Abenakis. And the Abenakis were a very, very friendly group. And I want to turn to this next page. This page will tell you about the Abenaki Native American Indians who are here. They would provide eventually food and shelter to the 7 men who came to Woburn. The Abenaki Indians were the first. They had 2 villages, one at Rag Rock, which is over by where the Hurl School, the old Hurl School, and one on Hon Pond Mountain, or Mount Inatu, as some people, the Native Americans would call it. And then the pond, as you see it now, some call it Inatu. The Native American word would be Wabisi. Wild swan is what it meant. And from there, the Native American Indians and the early settlers of Woburn became very close friends. Captain Edward Johnson would be finally called the father of Woburn. These 7 men, these 7 brave men who went into the wilderness, would eventually build a church and a town. And the statue that you see here is of Chief Winnie Tahulu, Native American from this area. And Winnie Tahulu, I wonder if you can spell that word. Maybe the teachers, that's a good word for a spelling test, don't you think? Chief Winnie Tahulu. but he was a brave Indian chief that lived in the Rag Rock area. This statue, actually, the original one was on the lagoon side of the pond. It was made from one tree. This here is a replica because the original one was stolen, actually. But this was rebuilt by Bob Shore of Skylight Studios in Woburn, and it was put back here in 2012. So we are here at the pond, and I'd like to tell you about the wonderful history of Hon Pond. We're here at this different section of Hon Pond, and for those who say Hon Pond like I do, it is H-O-R-N, Horn Pond. But I wanted you to understand what was here and how important this section of Woburn was to our early settlers, but it is also very important to the people who live here today. But I want you to know the history of it. This was a vital area for industry. And you know why? Because there were many things that happened here. First of all, they would have what we have on page 2, ice harvesting. And ice harvesting is when in the winter the pond would freeze and they would have 2 big ice houses. The Boston Ice House down at the other end of the pond, and here the Hon, down at this end, the southern end, the Hon Pond Ice Company. And what they would do, as you can see in the picture, the pond would freeze, the island was out there, which you cannot barely see now, and they would chop big blocks of ice, and the horses would pull and put the ice onto blocks where the train, because there was a train station that would run here, and they would load it up and they would sell their ice all over the country, believe it or not. And many, many people and young children your age would come in along the shore just to watch the horses pull and see the ice float in the water as they loaded it. So the ice harvesting, they call it, was very, very important. The other piece of it was just the recreation and the boating. We would have the Inner Tube Boat Club was here. We would have the beautiful island out here, which you can barely see now, but when I was little, and many of us who live in Woburn remember, that island in the 1800s and the early 1900s was a recreation area. People would come from Boston to come out here, and they would go out to the island by boat. You could swim out to the island. And there would be a restaurant out there you could eat, and even a bowling alley that many of you have heard of. There really was a bowling alley. And all of that ended, actually, probably in the turn of the century, in the 20th century. Now, the piece of it that I remember, and many of us will remember, is over here on page 3. This is over here to the right area, as you come in, was Foley Beach. And Foley Beach was so important to the children of the South End. You have to remember what was here in this part of Woburn. We're in the southern part of Woburn. And what you have to remember is that on Main Street, just up the road, there were probably 9 tanneries and japanning factories. Tanneries are where you take a cowhide and you turn it into leather. And Woburn was one of the largest leather manufacturers in the country, which is very important to our survival economically. So the children of these leather workers, and they worked so hard, it was very, very difficult work. They didn't have much money and they didn't have much recreation like you guys have now. The pond was critical. So they had Foley Beach. This whole entire area, all the way to Arlington Road on the turn, was from 1922 to 1967, a beautiful beach. You can see down in here the kids from the 1930s. They had a diving board, they'd have lifeguards, they'd have swimming lessons. It was a beautiful bathhouse that was over there, over by the corner of Arlington Road. And across the way there would be a wonderful hot dog stand where you could buy ice cream and hot dogs. And during this time, you guys, we talk about it on previous tours, I would say to the children, how many bathing suits do you have? Do you have a lot of bathing suits? Do you have one bathing suit? Well, the children of this day did not have very much. It was kind of difficult for them. Their parents were working so hard and they just didn't have the money. So we had bathhouses for girls and for boys. And what would happen is, if you didn't have a bathing suit, which most did not, you would walk up to Mrs., I believe her name was Mrs. McElhenney, Winnie McElhenney, and you would say, could I have a bathing suit? And she'd give you a bathing suit, and then you'd go swimming, Then you bring it back, and the next child would get the same bathing suit that you had on. Now, do you think your mother and fathers would like that now? I don't know. But in those days, they shared, and they understood, and they all played together. So it's a very important place for the children at that time. It is named Foley Beach, right here, Private Edward Foley. Many of our memorials and many of our special places are named after veterans in their honor because they paid the supreme sacrifice in wars. And Private Foley lived right here on Lake Street. He was only 18 years old, and he died in World War I in the Battle of Chateau Thierry, which is a very famous battle in World War I in 1918. So this is in his memory as one of those South End children whose father worked and family worked at the tanneries. So we commemorate this beautiful beach. And in 1938, another big event happened here on this page, and it was called the American Airmail Week. And Woburn wanted to participate in it. But the only thing is they didn't have an airport. So what they did, they set up so that the plane, which you see in this picture here, could land right behind me on the water. And they did. A temporary post office was set up down here at Foley Beach area, and you could get a very special airmail delivery stamp marked Woburn, which you see right here. And over 10,000 letters were dropped here and taken off in the plane, which all the people came to see. Over 20,000 people would come and along the shoreline just to watch this plane come in and have a mail that could be stamped with this special airmail stamp. So this is a very, very important place, and I know all of you must come down here to walk and to fish and to see the beautiful wildlife. So this is a very special place, Hon Pond. Now I'm taking you down. The trolley would normally pull in here and we would go inside, because this building behind me is the old pumping station. The old pumping station was built in 1872, and it was the first water system in Woburn. And they would get their water from the reservoir that would be up on the mountain, and they would produce probably about 6 million gallons a day. This pumping station closed 1986, and the new water treatment plant is how Woburn has their water treated and sent out to all of the homes now in Woburn. What I wanted to also mention to you is inside the pumping station is a beautiful steam engine. The steam engine looks like, you know the movie Titanic? Well, the same engines that were in the Titanic, this is what that steam engine looks like in here, as you'll see. And it's a smaller version. And Mr. Pollard, who lived here for many years on the grounds, would take care of this old pumping station. And you know, the people here that work at the DPW, they actually, when they go in there at night, they can hear stamping, 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 and they think the ghost of Mr. Pollard still is here watching over this old pumping station. So this is one of Woburn's oldest buildings and a very important historical piece of Woburn history. And also, while we're down this way, what many of you may or may not know, the mountain is in the back that you can see, and that's where the Indian Bowl is, up in that area. But more importantly, in the 1960s, early 1960s into the late 1960s, Woburn had its own ski area. Can you imagine if we had Foley Beach back for the summer and we had the ski area here that you could toboggan and ski down the mountain? It had the ski toes, and all of us who my age would remember it was so much fun to learn how to ski, and it was a beautiful recreation area. So we had the boating, and we had the beautiful beach, and we had the wonderful ski area in the wintertime. I wish it was back for all of you today. We are now at our second stop, and this stop is so important to Massachusetts history and to American history. We should be very proud of this area, which is Battle Road. Just as Captain Edward Johnson and those 7 men went into the wilderness, who are our first superstars in Woburn. Remember we talked about superstars? They are the first superstars of Woburn that got Woburn established, got our first church established, and what we have now today is due to those 7 men who went into the wilderness. Well, the group of men who left here in 1775 are also our second group of superstars that we should be very proud of. This is Battle Road. It is on the corner of Briscoe and off Revere Road. And right behind me is actually the road that over 265 Woburn militiamen heard the alarm. You know what April 19th is? 1775? Very important in American history. It is the start of the American Revolution. And here on this road, Woburn men marched. They came from the East Woburn area. They came from what now is Burlington. They came from what now is Woburn Center. They had 3 companies of militia. And Major Baldwin, Loamy Baldwin, who was not a colonel then, he led these 265 men when they heard the alarm. They first gathered down in Woburn Center near a Fowl Tavern, which is no longer there, which is right off of where all the stores are. And they marched, and the march to Lexington was over 6 miles. 2 men from the west side heard the alarm and heard the shots. They went right away on their own, and they were on the battle green when the British attacked the Patriots. But on this road here, we are very proud that we have this dedication so that everyone in future generations will know what happened on this road in Woburn history and in United States history. And I want to read what it says and what has been written. I hope you come to walk it. You used to be able to walk here now, but I don't think it's walkable at this time. But over here, this dedication happened in 2017 on the 375th anniversary of the town of Woburn. And it reads, Battle Road. On April 19th, 1775, 265 Woburn patriots, led by Major Loamy Baldwin, answered the call to arms. As they marched along this route, now known as Battle Road, they heard a great firing of muskets on Lexington Green. They hurried on to Lexington to join the pursuit of the British to Concord, and later to engage the regulars with punishing fire at Bloody Angle. Located alongside conservation land, as you can see around me, a portion of this historic road, originally called Old Lexington Road, remains preserved much as it was in the 18th century. Bordered with ancient stone walls, as you walk down you would see them. This stone commemorates Woburn's participation in the Revolutionary War and the militiamen who began the journey on this battle road that ended 8 long years after the founding of a new country, the United States of America. And it was dedicated on April 15, 2017. This road also was originally called Saw Pit Lane because there were all sawmills up in this area, and some of our early settlers would have lumber mills. That's what provided the housing and the lumber for homes after probably the early 18th century into the 19th century. So this is a very special place. Do you think the 265 men who left and went to Lexington are superheroes to remember for Woburn? You bet they are. Right now, we're in front of the Woburn District Court. And if you look on your trolley book on page 19, that area of the Woburn District Court, which came in the 1960s, before that were all the wonderful old train stations of Woburn. And a major train station was right here beside the courthouse. And the people would take the train into Boston all the way up to Lowell. And it was a very busy area. It's hard to believe that Woburn would have 3 train stations, and the major one was right here. And all of this now has been replaced by the Woburn District Court, which I hope you never get to go into, the Woburn District Court. We are now at the Woburn Public Library. Very special in Woburn, very special. But I'm in front of a donated statue by Marshall Tidd of Woburn, who donated this statue in 1899. This is the statue of Benjamin Thompson, also known as Count Rumford. And if you look on your page forward, this is the Woburn Public Library as it appeared. It was built in 1879. It is on the National Historic Register in the country. And what I'd like to point out to all of the children is the beautiful architecture and the gargoyles that appear and other features that appear. Do you know what a gargoyle is? That's a question for your teacher to answer, but it's a fun fact question that you can find the answer to. But as we span, do you see any gargoyles on the building? They're usually by doorways. Count Rumford we will talk about when we go up to North Woburn and give you a little bit more of the history. The library was renovated, the new addition, in 2019. And we were lucky last year to be one of the first ones to go in on a trolley tour into the archive room, which is the oblong room that has all of the wonderful archives that the library has been saving for future generations to enjoy. Archives from the Revolutionary War, from our earliest churches, from our fire department, our tanneries, our police departments. All of these wonderful archives are held in here for you to observe and see and totally enjoy. And I hope you all have a library card. Enjoy the Woburn Public Library always. Welcome to Woburn Common. Woburn Common, a very special place. We're going to talk about what is here on the Common now for all of us to enjoy and understand. But I wanted to mention to you that Woburn Common is the original center of everyday life in the early founding days of Woburn. The first church was here, the first meeting house that Captain Edward Johnson and the other Woburn settlers and families established. And it has always been the center of activity. But as we see it today, it is the Common. And we honor our military men and women who served in all of our wars from 1640 to current day. We're going to start with one of our first on the Common memorials. And this here, as many people go by, they don't know what it is. And when I have the kids come up, I say, what do you think this is? They think it's a taco, they think it's a tortoise shell, they think it's, I don't know, they don't know what it really is. But what this is a ventilator cowl off the USS Maine, the second battleship that the US Navy made. And this USS Maine was stationed in Cuba, in Havana Harbor, in 1898. And in 1898, it had over 300 sailors and Marines from around the United States that were on this ship. And mysteriously, somebody detonated a mine on the bottom of this ship in the middle of the night, killing most of these sailors and Marines. The ship sunk in less than 40 feet of water in Havana Harbor. What happened, it would be a little ignition that started the Spanish-American War in April of 1898. The war did not last long, thank goodness. It only lasted 3 months. In 1912, the United States went back to Havana Harbor and they salvaged the ship. And they brought the ship up along with the remains of 66 sailors who were interred at Arlington National Cemetery. The mask of the USS Maine is in Arlington National Cemetery. For those who have been there, it's quite a very beautiful place to go, and you will see the USS Maine mask. The Maine was built right here in New England in Bath, Maine. This ventilator cowl was offered along with other artifacts from the USS Maine to patriotic groups throughout the country. A group in Woburn, a group of businessmen in 1912 raised the money, and Woburn was very blessed to have this ventilator cowl which stood on the top of the ship. If you turn to your books that the teacher shows you on page 6, this is the USS Maine and the ventilator cowl. It'll show you the ship as it appeared when it was detonated with a mine in 1898, and then the original picture from 1913 when this went in, this original casing. This is not the original casing. This is the original casing went in. This casing here was done in 2016 by the Friends of Woburn Veterans, which I'm very proud to be a member, and Robert Shore of Skylight Studios designed and built this beautiful encasing so that future generations will be able to have this wonderful military piece of memorabilia. So I hope you get to enjoy it when you walk by the Common. Now you know what it is. The next memorial that we're going to look at, which is so spectacular, is this 8.5-foot bronze statue, the Hiker. The statue was dedicated in November of 1934. It commemorates the American soldiers who fought in the Spanish-American War. You know how we just spoke about the USS Maine and the cowl, the start of the Spanish-American War? This statue represents the men from the United States who fought in the Spanish-American and Philippine-American Wars. It was called the Hiker. The statue is called the Hiker, and it's a name that the American soldiers gave themselves. The other term that you'll hear for the Spanish-American War soldiers is the rough and ready soldier. And he sure looks rough and ready, and I think he's a very good-looking, handsome replica of the wonderful men that served in the Spanish-American War. So we're very proud to have it here as a wonderful showplace at the Common. Let's go on to the next and first memorial to be here on this Common. We are now at the Civil War Memorial Statue. It's on page 5 of your book, and this is the very first memorial that was on the Common. It was put here in 1869, and you believe it, there were 50,000 people who came to Woburn Common to view the unveiling of this beautiful, beautiful 8-foot bronze statue. It commemorates the Union soldiers who fought from Woburn. Woburn would have over 700 men that would fight in the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. You haven't studied about the Civil War yet, you're only in the 3rd grade, but you will know about it as you grow older. And this here shows the wonderful tribute that the Woburn residents paid to all of the men who served to save the Union. And it was a very, very difficult time in the 1860s. The statue represents, as you see, the Union soldier, as I mentioned, and on each panel it will tell you about the men that we lost. On this side, it is the killed in battle. Woburn men would fight at Gettysburg, Antietam. They would fight at some of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War, and they fought with great distinction and great bravery. These are the ones who were killed in the battle. Some of them would be fathers and sons. The youngest soldier from Woburn to serve in the Civil War for the Union was Bryant. His last name was Bryant. He was 12 years old, and he was a drummer. They didn't know he was 12 years old, but he went through the battles of Gettysburg, came back when someone found out how old he was. When he went home here to Woburn, his brother, who was 15, enlisted, and he would not make it. He would be killed in the Civil War. And young Charles Bryant, he would go back in as a drummer later on at 16. So his father served in the same war, and a brother and himself. And it affected everybody in the country, and everybody, especially here, home to us, Woburn. On the other side, you will see, if we go around this way, you'll see on the other side that it mentions those that were killed or died of disease or died in a prison camp, because they had prison camps. For those who don't know, the Civil War, it was the Union against the Confederacy when the southern states wanted to break away. This shows you those soldiers who died of wounds or died in what they called at the time the rebel prison camps. And it was a very, very tough thing for the country. But we came together thanks to Abraham Lincoln, because you know Abraham Lincoln was the president at the time. And you know the issue was about slavery and economics of the country. Slavery was an awful thing that happened in this country, and a war was fought over it. And we came together at the end of the war, and this statue pays tribute to those soldiers. I want you to see what it says on the front, which makes a lot of sense, and I want you to understand what it means. What we have to remember is we have to always remember history and those who gave and sacrificed for us to have the life we have today. And in a critical time in our country, these men, this statue represents the men who kept our country together. It says at the bottom, "The spirit of liberty lives in the ashes of its defenders." And these soldiers, this statue represents the defenders of our liberty. We can never forget that. This statue is quite beautiful. This is one of my favorite statues on the Common. Before we go further down to the Woburn Honor Roll, I want you to point out to you at this corner of Wynn Street and across from the Common is now the Satsang church. But before then, it was the Unitarian Church. And this church, as you see it now, did not look like this. It had a beautiful tower at the top, and a tornado in 1924 blew it over. But this church and this location was sold probably in the 1970s. But what I want to bring to your attention is this is the site where this church is now of the very first public school in Woburn, right there. We're going to walk down now to the Woburn Honor Roll. The Woburn Honor Roll is a gift from the John and Kathy Flaherty, who live in Woburn. They worked with the Friends of Woburn Veterans to build this wall. It's all a private donation. This wall cost over $700,000, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tribute to all the men and women who served in the military, living or past, who have died from 1640, our earliest militias, to current wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. There are over 13,000 men and women listed here. Each section, each panel, shows the names, the name of the war, and they have etchings of special pictures of that period of each war, which I'll show you. As we come up, I always ask the children, do you have a relative who's on the wall? Like I have a relative on the wall. My husband is on the wall for the Vietnam War. My father is on the wall for World War II. And actually my uncle is on the wall, many uncles, and one who died in World War II. It's a very special place of honor. But I wanted to ask you, children, do you know what a star means beside a person's name who's on this wall? The star indicates that they were killed in the war, whether it be World War II, the American Revolution, but that star indicates that they should always be remembered because they paid the supreme sacrifice for our country. Let's go down and look at some of the wonderful etchings that are here on this beautiful honor roll that we're very lucky to have here on Woburn Common. As you can see on this wall here, this is the early wars from 1640, our militia. You see the stars beside their names. Then you come down to the American Revolution that we talked about earlier, 1775 to 1785, and you can see all of the family names that were here in Woburn: Richardson, Wyman, Converse, Johnson. So these are the section that we honor those men that served in our earliest battles and earliest wars. They're really quite beautiful, these etchings, and every one as you go around, as I mentioned, will have a beautiful image so that it's a reminder of what it was like for that particular war. Okay. While we're here on the Common, I just want to show you right across from the Common where the memorials are is City Hall. This City Hall building that you see here was built in 1931, and this is where the mayor works. This is where you go to register to vote, to get a license, to get married. So this is a very important center for all of Woburn business, how the city runs here at City Hall. Behind it, as you can see, because I want to mention it to you, is the clock tower of the First Congregational Church as we know it growing up here in Woburn. That tower, which I have climbed all the way to the top where you see the windows, is 196 feet high. It's quite beautiful to go up there. And this is the sixth edifice, or the sixth building for the very first church, the meeting house that you saw in the inside page of your book. This is the sixth building representing the founding church of Woburn in 1642. Welcome to the first burial ground. This first burial ground is on Park Street, and we're going to go in. This is my favorite historic place in all of Woburn because it's so special. It tells about the lives and the wonderful history of our earliest settlers. So we're going to go walk up the stairs now, and I'll take you through, and there's a lot of stories to be told. We are up here at the legend. The legend was installed in 2017 for the 375th anniversary of the city of Woburn. Woburn is old. We talked about it at the very beginning with Captain Edward Johnson, and those earliest settlers are buried here. Their stones don't exist from those earlier days in the 17th century because the Puritans did not believe in really memorializing with stones. They maybe had a wooden cross or maybe had nothing. This cemetery is, the first burial is 1642 and it closed in 1794 when the second burial ground opened on Montfield Avenue. You know where the Bowlerdrome is over there? Right across the street. That is the second burial ground. And I want to just start off by saying, as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite places because every stone here tells you a story. And many of you may or may not have been to a burial ground. I want to ask you, do you know the difference between a burial ground and a cemetery? This is a burial ground. A burial ground was owned by the church. The church maintained it, and the church at the time of the 17th century, they were in charge of all of the burials. The first meeting house, as I mentioned, was on the common, and the deacons of the church were in charge of this burial ground. It originally was a beautiful pasture. All of these buildings weren't here. There was a brook over to the right, and they would bury their town members in any spot that they wanted. If you notice, they're not in any kind of order. These are mostly slate stones and coming from England or American slate. And these cemetery, the difference between it, as I mentioned, is a church owns a burial ground where a town owns the cemetery. A town is in charge of it and anybody can be buried there. As we look out here, there's probably, I believe, 269 stones that are still here that we can read about and learn about. There are 15 Revolutionary War soldiers here. There are over 69 veterans of different wars here, from the King Philip War to the Revolutionary War to the early militias. The first burial here was in 1642, right after the town was founded. It happened to be Hannah Richardson, a little girl just 2 years old. So as we look out, you see the flags, and you understand what a flag represents beside a grave. Well, if you look at this one right here in front of me, there is a marker here. That is a Revolutionary War soldier. But the flag represents any man, and these are all men that have a flag, who died in battle in a war. They are, as I mentioned, one of the 69 flags that you'll see here. Behind me is the new legend. And this legend was done in 2017. In what it does, it names all the stones that you see here. Because this really is Woburn's oldest and most sacred outdoor museum. This is an outdoor museum. It's not a place to play. It's not a place to destroy. As you walk through, you will see some of the stones that were destroyed. They were destroyed by vandals, or people would come in here and hang out and not take care of the stones. They would tip them over. They would put paint on them. Now that's disgraceful. That can't happen to these poor relatives that were buried here. Even though we're here today to take care of them, we have to have respect for them, even because their relatives no longer are around here in Woburn. The most popular name that you will see, the most common name that you will see buried here is Richardson, and that's because they are the relatives of the three brothers that were the original founders with Captain Johnson: Ezekiel, Samuel, and Thomas. Their wives are buried here. They are probably buried here because the church was very important to them. They were all Puritans, and to be buried with their church was very important. When you look at some of the stones as we walk around, I will show you, they have what we call iconology. That's a fancy word for symbols. And these symbols on the stones represent different things based on the time period. In the early Puritan days, you would have a winged angel, like a skeleton head with a wings. And what that meant to the people is that you have died and gone on to heaven. Keep in mind that a lot of people in the early part of the 17th century did not have the luxury like you do of going to school and learning how to read and write. So what the ministers would do, and there are 4 or 5 ministers that are buried here, early ministers of the first churches of Woburn are buried here, they would say to them, you better behave or you're going to die and you're not going to go to heaven. Or you should lead a good life. And so that's what these symbols tell people who could not read or write as they walk by them, a reminder that someday you'll be here, so you better behave and be a good person. Pretty strict. But as the years went by, they would put more beautiful iconology on there, like flowers or fruit. And, you know, maybe they would put wheat, which indicated that the person who was buried was a farmer. So this is a beautiful, beautiful museum. This is the 23rd oldest cemetery in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's how old this is. So I would like to walk you through and show you a couple of stones and tell you a story. On the other side of this, as we'll show you, is a map of the cemetery with little red dots, because in 2017, we have new technology now. This is the technology world. And what the city of Woburn did with the Cemetery Commission, who takes care of this cemetery, is they hired a man to come and do GPR, ground penetrating radar. You might have seen it on maybe an adventure show on TV where they have a machine and they go up and down, and what they're looking for is unmarked graves when they do it in a cemetery. And what Woburn discovered was that we have over 400 unmarked graves in this cemetery that you cannot see. And they are only indicated now by a small silver disc as you walk through here. That's where a grave is. On this walkway, the walkway was built before they knew that. And when you see a red stone on the walkway, these are unmarked graves that are buried beneath here. So it's important, very important, to show great respect for this outdoor museum. So let's walk over and I'll tell you the story of a couple that are over here. In your book, on page 7, you will see the grave of Ashel Porter. Now, Ashel Porter, he was a Woburn farmer. He was not a soldier in the Revolutionary War, but on April 19th, he was with Mr. Richardson, his buddy. They were egg farmers, and they went into Cambridge to sell their eggs. And on their way back home to Woburn, they were met with the British, who were headed to the Lexington Green. The British, they thought they were spies. And they were trying to tell them, we're not spies. But they were captured. And they really were the first prisoners that we know of in the American Revolution by the British, of American settlers. Well, what happened next very quickly was they heard the firing on Lexington Green. The British soldiers that had them said, you know, we got to go, we got to get there. What are we going to do with these two guys? So they said to the both of them, listen, we're going to let you go back to Woburn, but you can't run, walk away. They had no weapons, walk away, and we'll let you go back to Woburn. Guess who did not listen to the instructions? Unfortunately, Ashel Porter. Ashel Porter ran, and when he ran, they shot him in the back. And he was really the first casualty from Woburn on April 19, 1775. Mr. Richardson would go on to fight in the Continental Army all the way through to the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783. So this is two very different stories of two very different men, all Woburn residents. And this stone was put in here in the 1960s because his original stone was destroyed. And here is where I talk about the iconology. This is the winged skull, and as you can see, it is death has gone on to heaven, and that's what it reminds you of. Now I'd like you to take you to the first military casualty on April 19th, Daniel Thompson. We are now at the grave site of Daniel Thompson. He is the first military casualty in the Revolutionary War. He was 40 years old. He lived on Main Street. He was married. He had 5 children. He was in the military, and he heard the alarm on April 19th. And because he lived in the central square and close to North Woburn, he went off early, said goodbye to his wife and children. He went up to North Woburn to alert all the other militia and bring them down to Woburn Center to gather with Major Baldwin. And what happened here is he went off on the march on Battle Road. When they got to the green, the battle had just ended, and they saw the wounded bodies. And what they did was they went on to Concord and Lincoln. And Daniel Thompson was a great marksman, and he was shooting the grenadiers, the British soldiers. And there was a big battle going on. And one of the grenadiers was trying to figure out, who is this person, this soldier, this man who is getting our soldiers, our British soldiers, because he was such a great marksman. Well, that grenadier went up in a tree and he spotted Daniel Thompson behind a barn. And unfortunately, he shot and killed Daniel Thompson. His brother Samuel was right near him. And his brother Samuel fought in the Indian Wars and was the great diarist from Woburn who wrote about that for Woburn history. And Daniel Thompson and Ashel Porter were the first two casualties and only casualties on April 19th. They were both brought back to the cemetery 2 days later and buried. So do you think Daniel Thompson is a hero, a superhero? He is a real superhero for Woburn. And he's to always be remembered as to what he did for our freedom and as a patriot to become the United States of America. Another great leader and great military leader and great civil leader is right here at the Baldwin obelisk. The obelisk at the top of the hill was built in 1810. It's a tomb, and it houses over 13 of the Baldwin family relatives. Colonel Loammi Baldwin, he was now a colonel at the end of the Revolutionary War. He was the leading military man of the day during the Revolutionary War. His father is one of the co-signers of the founding of Woburn, Henry Baldwin. They were very prominent in Woburn. Colonel Baldwin would go on to fight with General Washington, crossing the Delaware with other Woburn men. The Woburn men would fight at Bunker Hill. Woburn men would fight at Valley Forge through all of our battles on page 9. During the Revolutionary War, do you think Woburn had slaves? They had a few, and they were called servants for life. But during the Revolutionary War, they could serve in the military and fight for their freedom and our freedom. And they did. Do you know that Woburn had 18 patriots of color? And those 18 soldiers, like Prince Sutton, would go on and fight with General Washington through the beginning of the war to the end of the war. He is not buried here. But this would be, for those who don't know it, the adults and the teachers who are listening, the Revolutionary War would be the last time the American military would be integrated until the Korean War. That's a long time. But these patriots of color, whose names are on our honor roll, worked and served with Colonel Baldwin and with the Continental Army. They are not to be forgotten, just as all of these men and women who first settled Woburn and fought in the Revolution and founded the town should never be forgotten. And as I said, this is a sacred, special place. Colonel Baldwin was the chief engineer on the building of the Middlesex Canal down at Hon Pond. It would travel 27 miles, because you got to remember there were no cars and the horses couldn't take all of the farm food and materials, and they had to sell and trade. So they had on the Middlesex Canal, built in 1805, and it pretty much ended about 1840s when the railroad came into Woburn. But it ran for 27 miles from the Abajona River out to the Charles River, and it would go all the way to Lowell, and that's how they had the transportation. Colonel Baldwin, it was an engineering feat. It was called like a superhighway on water at the time in the early 19th century. And Colonel Baldwin was the chief engineer. His son, Loammi Jr., would be called the father of American civil engineering. All of those wonderful, wonderful people were born and raised here in Woburn. Do you think they are superheroes? Yes, they are. They're here for their bravery, they're here for their leadership and their wonderful smarts. Now, what I wanted to bring to your attention, this cemetery holds the remains of 8 United States presidents, their ancestors. And those presidents who have ancestors buried here are President Cleveland, President Coolidge, President Harrison, President Pierce, President Hoover, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. All of their relatives are buried here, their early ancestors, in this wonderful cemetery. And you know who else's relatives are here? Bill Belichick. His maternal relatives from the early colonial days are buried here. So this is a very special place. I want to tell you one other story, and it's an early story, and it's about Mrs. Susanna Richardson Brooks. You know, in the early days when the Captain Johnson came and the Richardson brothers came, there were no doctors. If you got sick, there were no hospitals. So you had people who would know how to work the herbal medicines. Woburn's first doctor, do you think it was a man or a woman? Well, it was a woman. It was Susanna Richardson Brooks. She was the wife of Ezekiel Richardson, who had passed away only a few years after discovering Woburn and settling Woburn. Woburn, as you know, as I said, was settled in 1640, but became a town in 1642. This town is 378 years old, and Mrs. Richardson Brooks lived that long ago. I'm so happy that you could come and see one of my favorite spots, the first burial ground of Woburn. Welcome to the Burdett Mansion. The Burdett Mansion is this beautiful house. It is the home to the Woburn Historical Society since 2006. The home was originally built in 1880 by Charles Burdett, the president of Burdett College, a business college in Boston. And we have been very lucky to be here where we can share Woburn's rich history. The Burdett Mansion allows the society to have a place where we can share and educate people on Woburn history. We have had many exhibits here, and one of the exhibits that we have had is on Woburn farming. Woburn, when it was first founded, was agricultural. The early settlers were farmers. The first tannery in Woburn, or tanning yard, was in 1666 by the Wyman brothers. And we're on Main Street, as you may or may not know, at the corner of Mishawam Road. And further up the street is the Wyman School. Across from the Wyman School is the site of the very first tannery by the Wyman brothers. And the Wyman brothers and the Wyman name would live on in Woburn and in Burlington for many generations, even till today. Generations of Woburn families had farms in Woburn. The last farm in Woburn that was sold not too long ago is the Shannon Farm in the west side. If you go further up the street on Main Street, where Stop and Shop is now, this farm here, Bowser Dairy Farm, is in that location. That's what was there before Stop and Shop. So Woburn has a great agricultural history. It actually was the largest grower of carnations in East Woburn by David Lindquist and his family. The Lindquist florists were the largest carnation growers in the country. We would ship flowers all over the world and all over the country. Woburn would have many greenhouses in East Woburn and in the west side. The only part of Woburn that did not have farming was in the south end, and that's because we have the tanneries. The other industry that came in during the Civil War and just before the Civil War and really started to boom in the Civil War was our tanneries. The tanneries is where, as I mentioned before, you would take hides, and on page 17 you can see it. You can see pictures of the immigrant workers who came here from Ireland and then from Italy and from Greece during the 1800s, who built on their backs the growth of Woburn. These tannery workers down here where you see the vats, they would take a cowhide and it weighed about 60 pounds. They would dunk it into this acid to soften it When they pulled it out, it would be 100 pounds. These men had no insurance. They worked very hard. It was back-breaking work, and it stunk on top of it. And all of these tanneries were the backbone of our industry for many generations. And this tannery here that you see at the top is the Edward Dow Tannery, originally down by the pond until it burned. It reopened down in the south end. And this tannery ran from probably where Green Street is all the way down to the Winchester line, almost across street. So Woburn would have over 12 smokestacks from St. Charles Church area all the way to Winchester line. So you can imagine what was in the air and how difficult it was to breathe or to wash your laundry. These people were the backbone of our industry, and we want you to always remember our tannery workers and our farmers, because they too are superheroes. Come and visit us at the Burdett Mansion, I hope in the fall when everything gets back to normal. Thank you. Benjamin Thompson was a very special person. He had a brilliant mind. He is actually recognized for his social reform when he became Count Rumford over in Germany. It actually was called Bavaria at the time, and then now it is known as we know it as Germany. But before then, at the time of the Revolution, Benjamin Thompson was not known as Count Rumford. On page 13, I have a little bit about Benjamin Thompson and then Count Rumford. But I want to tell you that during the American Revolution, Count Rumford had married a woman from New Hampshire, and he was a loyalist in the British Army at the time. That's why you see him in the red uniform. But when the Revolution hit and it affected Woburn, he came back to visit his mother. Colonel Baldwin said to him, you know, the people of Woburn who are patriots are not going to like it that you are remaining a loyalist. But you know what? I don't think of him as a traitor like some people will say. No, I think it was an event in history that we talk about, events where people have to make a decision. And Benjamin Thompson decided to stay in the Loyalist Army, to stay with the British, and not be part of the new country with the Patriots. Not wrong or right, it was his choice. What would happen is when he came to Woburn, the people found this out, and they weren't very happy with him. And they actually wanted to tar and feather him, which is a horrible punishment. Loammi Baldwin, his best friend, said, listen, you better go see your mother and get back into Boston because you cannot be protected here. And that's exactly what happened. He would leave Boston, he would go to Europe, where he would become a very, very famous scientist. He was a brilliant man in physics. He would have many discoveries in science with regards to heat and light. And he would also be a great social reformer in Bavaria for social justice and for the living conditions. And he would never come back to the United States. He would die in Paris in 1814. President Franklin Roosevelt considered Rumford, Count Rumford, one of the greatest minds that ever come out of the United States, along with Benjamin Franklin. That's quite a compliment. It does have a museum inside, and I hope someday you can get in to see all of the artifacts, remembrance of Count Rumford, aka the real Benjamin Thompson. As we come to this end of the tour, I hope you enjoyed it. It's not the same as being on a trolley, but we tried to make it fun and that you learned about Woburn history. And I do hope that you have a great summer and you come back, and good luck in the 4th grade. Thank you, teachers, for all you do. God bless you.